This episode of the Flush Podcast is brought to you by North Dakota Tourism. Plan a hunt in North Dakota this fall, and you'll find out why their bird hunting opportunities are legendary. My guest today is Jorge Ramirez. He's known as the Upland Jitsu, focusing on the art of upland hunting. He lives and hunts in California, and his tactics are as interesting as his hunting mission. Welcome to another episode of the Flush Podcast. My name is Travis Frank. I'm your host. Brandon Morton is our producer. Today's guest comes to us all the way from California. Jorge Ramirez, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Good. I thank you for allowing me to be a part of this, and I'm doing well, and I hope everyone else is.
Well, it's certainly a pleasure. You have quite the story to tell. Let's start with your title, Upland Jitsu. Where did that come from?
So that came from a love for, obviously upland hunting. Upland hunting is something that I've put in a lot of my time and effort, and I would consider it a passion of mine. And the jitsu end of that would be just from my martial arts background. I've been involved in martial arts since the time I was a kid. From my karate to jujitsu and kendo to my adulthood today.
Gotcha. How many belts have you? Is it black belt? Would that be the highest rank there?
That would be the top. With judo, I would say no, because I didn't even get it to brown belt. So I was only green belt up in judo. So that would be my highest ranking. And when it would come to judo, and it just really depends on each particular style or form of martial art that you're practicing as well. So all those don't translate the same as well.
Gotcha. So you're a writer and a conservationist. You're in many ways a speaker, an advocate for all hunters in the upland world. And you've been hunting for how many years now?
I've been hunting since, I would say, with my own rifle, and I would say sometime in the '90s. So I've been like mid '90s. I was tagging along with my dad, in the early late '80s, when he would do a lot of deer hunting. But I didn't, technically hunt until about I was in my teens or so.
Gotcha. So it was something that you were, you learned how to hunt early on from your dad, just like so many other Americans, right? It wasn't an art that you took up later in life. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I was fortunate enough to have my father. He's from Mexico, and hunting in Mexico isn't really a widespread thing. A lot of people can't do it legally out there unless you're really, really rich. So I was really fortunate enough that when he came over to the United States, he picked it up, not having a background in it, obviously, and I was really fortunate enough to have a dad that hunted. It wasn't until later on, however, in my early adulthood when I actually got into upland hunting. So that was a very, very new venture for me, and not very similar to deer hunting in a lot of ways, as most of you know.
Yeah, absolutely. So were you born in Mexico or were you born in California?
Myself, I was born in Southern California.
Southern California. Gotcha.
Mhm.
And your dad came over at what age?
He was, I want to say he was in his early 20s, so that would have been, I would say late 60s, early 70s.
Gotcha.
He was
So did
he was
he
over here.
hunt? Did he hunt growing up as a kid then in Mexico?
Again, in Mexico, you have to be really, really rich to do it. And, most people that actually hunt out in the country area for most intents and purposes are doing it illegally. When he was younger, however, he was pretty poor himself. His family was pretty poor. There were just farmers out there in Michoacan, Mexico, and he would hunt. I'm not really sure if they were crows or not, but he would always describe them as black birds. And he would have like a little muzzle loader that I'm not even sure where they got, and they would just put rocks or bearings in them and shoot birds out there. So that was his extent of bird hunting experience prior to him coming to the United States.
Wow. Has he ever gone back down there to go hunting?
Again, you got to be really, really rich to do it out there, or in some cases, I think they have guided hunts, like in the northern parts and even the central parts of Mexico. But no, he's never been there to hunt. Um, it would be awesome to do that, but especially nowadays, Mexico's in the turmoil that it is right now. I know it's really hard to get out there and travel, even for people that are local or know the area really well.
I take it you've not hunted in Mexico then either?
No, that is a dream of mine, to
Yeah.
one day head out there. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the elegant quail out there in Mexico, and it's a
I've heard of them. Absolutely. Yeah. I've
yeah,
looked into it a little bit myself just to, it's something completely different, I guess.
yeah. I mean, that would be a dream hunt of mine, and to get out there in Mexico and hunt some elegant quail. Baja California has some really good hunting, from what I understand as well, and I know they're really big with valley quail, and I think there's pheasant out there and mountain quail as well. So you never know.
Yeah. So let's get into today and what you're up to. How would you describe um, your role in the upland bird hunting world?
Yeah, I think at this point, I didn't really initially when I got into the upland hunting, I guess social media, I guess scene, I guess you would call it. I didn't really have intentions on really being a mover or a shaker to any degree, but it's really, this passion of mine is really just blossomed and just evolved over the past few years, where I've had this very unique opportunity to use my platform to um, I would call myself an advocate, an advocate for getting people out there back into the uplands and introducing the uplands to people that would, in many cases, not have the opportunity. Yeah, so that's what I would call myself. I would call myself an upland advocate.
For women, for minorities, for everybody, right?
Yeah, it's not exclusive to just any one demographic or group of people. It's really anyone that isn't hasn't had the opportunity to go out there and hunt birds and just be out there and wild places. um, you know, Obviously the minority part of it, myself being a minority and having a bit of a not necessarily um, based on my race, but it was hard, eventually getting into good cover and finding birds, and I didn't have that mentorship portion of it when I initially got into upland hunting. So that's something that's very, very near and dear to my heart, and it's something that in my writing and a lot of what I advocate for is helping people find their way in the uplands.
A few weeks back, we had Darrell Smith on, and we really um, had an opportunity to learn about his story and some of
Mm-hmm.
the challenges that he's experienced getting into hunting later in life as a black man.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, I mean, I've thought about that. I've talked about that a lot with a lot of other hunters too. Have you, I mean, in the last few months, have you had an opportunity to speak on that from your own experiences to others, or has has the conversation grown for you?
Yeah, it's definitely grown in these days where I think the industries and a lot of the conservation organizations are taking notice of this movement, of just inclusion of getting especially minorities back into hunting or the uplands. That conversation is is this is probably, if anything that has come good out of these, these past few months in 2020, it's it's this, is having the opportunity to speak about this inclusion issue that we're having. And it's definitely been a topic for myself, and I'm happy to touch on it and speak on it and advocate for it 100%.
What kind of challenges have you experienced personally getting into the field and hunting?
Yeah, I can't say that I've ever physically had a, or just any kind of barrier when it comes to my own race. Obviously there are, you know there is racism out there, and there's unfortunately racism in the outdoor community as well, and you do see a little bit of that here and there. I think the biggest thing, as for myself, being a minority again, it's just the representation within the community. It's really hard to connect, and I felt that may have been a barrier for myself when I initially tried to get my foot in the door as far as upland hunting. Um, so I think that's an issue that has been ongoing, and to this day, it's just the representation is not not necessarily unwelcoming, but when you're looking at it through the lens of a minority, there's not a lot of representation in there.
Right, right. Well, I'm glad to hear that you haven't personally experienced um, some of those difficulties that Drell spoke about. That makes me
Mhm,
happy to hear because it's just like, ah, man, how can we just invite? I mean, one of the greatest limiting factors for hunters all over the country is opportunities, right? And
mhm.
if you don't have the opportunity, you'll most likely never be able to hunt. And so I just, gosh, I want everybody to have the opportunity. That would be the dream, right? That would be our
Absolutely.
goal as hunters. And um, so I know that you are out there and you're helping other people get into hunting. How do you go about doing that?
One of my main methods for wanting to get people into hunting is I created a blog, and I create articles. I also write for various publications, and Project Upland is one of them, and it's just really being focused on just dumbing it down, to a degree. I hate to phrase it that way, but just making information really accessible to people that are new to the art and to the sport of upland hunting. And it's geared towards what type of gear do I buy, how does it really have to be that expensive, and where do I even find birds, and how could I do it without a dog in most cases, which is something I also advocate for, being a person that does not hunt with a dog. And I think in the upland community, especially people from the outside looking in, that could be a really, really big barrier for people. And unfortunately, like someone like myself living, pretty close to the suburban and urban areas of Southern California, a very high wired and high strung dog like a German short hair pointer is just not it's not in the cards for most people that are living in small areas, and it's it could be a big barrier for some people, and especially when there's this implied um, notion that you need a dog to go out there and hunt.
Right. So you do not have a dog, correct?
Myself personally, no, I do not. Never
Is
have.
is that the reason why you choose to hunt without one is because just your living situation in
You know
California,
that
or is there something else
that
to it?
Yeah, no, that was one of the main factors. Is just I didn't have time or space to have a dog, and in most cases, obviously, when I started upland hunting, I didn't have a dog, and that's just something that kind of went on, uh, from the beginning to now. It's so, sorry, maybe I'm not really phrasing that right. So yeah, I've never had a dog, and it's just something that I've learned to work with, and it's just been certain living situations. Obviously my dad did not have a dog. I don't have that background as well, so that it's just that also is part of the reason why I don't have a dog as well.
Have you hunted with others that do?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I've had the opportunity to do it, from time to time. There's friends that have dogs, there's acquaintances, and there's people that are just plain trying to convert me over to to get a dog. So, I've had a lot. I've been really fortunate to have some opportunities to at least hunt behind a dog and learn a little bit about it. And um, yeah, it's something that also appeals to me as well. And it's just I find it to be a little bit more of a challenge, and it's something that I've grown and it's evolved over. My tactics have evolved over the time of getting into hunting and into the space where I'm in now, where I may have the opportunity. I think I'm in the current situation that I'm in now, might allow me to have a dog and have that time to train one. But I've just so far into it now that I'm just I do it just plain out of I like the challenge.
Yeah, and plus now you've kind of built this name for yourself in the hunting world as the one of the few upland hunters in America that is very successful without a dog, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I do pretty well. Again, I think my hunting has evolved over the years, and it's not just always about the limit, but the quality of the hunt. And I just yeah, it's something that really appeals to me, and I also just like advocating for it because I think that's happens to be a barrier for some people, and I don't want that to be the reason why people don't get into upland hunting. And it might not be for everyone, and I don't absolutely do not advocate that everyone does it or continue to do it, but it's something that I think we should tell other future hunters that it's okay to do.
Right. Yep. It's okay to come into it in any way. I mean, there's some people
Absolutely.
that are like, if you don't have a double barrel, you're not an
Oh
upland hunter.
yes.
And just all of those stereotypes that are associated with it. I hate every single one of them. Why can't we just eliminate it? I mean, I get the beauty behind certain
Hmm.
guns. I get the beauty behind certain places and certain dogs and all of that. I mean, we can appreciate it, but just the fact that there's this, if you don't have that, you technically don't really fit in here. I mean, that's just so
Yeah.
stupid. That is so dumb.
Yeah. And
Can't
that
stand it.
and that's something that's perpetuated, I think, just with obviously social media and the industry in general. I think there's just there's too many barriers that we put up, and maybe not intentionally, but those are out there. And I went through that phase as well, and I could relate to that, where I felt like I needed a certain type of shotgun. The configuration was really important to me before I even started it. And that's one thing that again, with my writing and with I'm advocating for, is just letting people know it's not necessary. You don't necessarily need to go out there with a double barreled shotgun. There's other options out there, and you don't need to buy a $10,000 you know uh, amounts of equipment to get out there. It's really easy to get into upland hunting if you're resourceful, or if you're just a budget conscious person as well.
Absolutely. I mean, really, things you need, the needs, not the wants in upland hunting is
Mhm.
a shotgun that you can get. It doesn't have to be. I remember, so I didn't grow up in an upland bird hunting family at all. They were deer hunters, big game hunters, and that was about it. Just because my dad worked a lot and didn't have the ability to go upland bird hunting.
Mhm.
We weren't in a position to have a dog. So just some of those things limited me, but yet I still went out really early in life and I bought a used 12 gauge Remington 870 pump. And
Okay.
so for $50, I bought that gun with my own lawn mowing money when I was 12 years old. When I could
That's
legally
awesome.
go hunt, and a box of shells, an orange hat, and a vest, right? I mean,
Yeah,
that's
that's all you
really
need.
all you desperately need, right? And
uh,
obviously, you can spend many, many, many thousands of dollars to upgrade, but it doesn't have to go that way.
yeah.
So I'm always interested, and I always am intrigued by um, your style of hunting and appreciate it. How do you? So where do you hunt? What kind of birds do you hunt? Quail, obviously, but
Mhm.
what kind of quail are you hunting out west? And how the hell do you find them?
Yeah, so again, I kind of want to touch on, I think, the region is really important as well. So I mainly hunt out of Southern California. That's where, I did the majority of my hunting as even a teenager and a young adult as well. And I think there's this perceived uh, stereotype that there's no hunting out here in California, especially Southern California. And that's one thing that I really advocate for as well. Is I want people to know that there are great hunting opportunities out here. You don't necessarily need to drive out to South Dakota to get into birds. And that I think that happens to be another barrier that people struggle with, especially living out here in Southern California and in the urban and suburban areas. But yeah, I hunt out of Southern California. I target mainly quail. Valley quail is my main target. Every now and then you do get lucky, and in the certain areas that you hunt out here, and you could also get into mountain quail towards the southeastern end, towards the deserts. You're getting Gambel's quail as well, and I did a little bit of hunting out in Arizona as well. I spent a couple of years out there in Arizona, and that's I would say that's probably where my first wild birds were ever hunted, was out there in Arizona for Gambel's quail. But yeah, we're mainly targeting valley quail out here. Hunting without a dog presents its own challenges. So it, again, my hunting has hunting quail for that fact has evolved, and I've learned what works and what doesn't work. Hunting without a dog, at least for myself, requires a lot of prep, a lot of uh, pre-scouting rather. So I tend to do a lot of pre-scouting, locating birds. There's a few methods of doing that. Obviously, you could always target areas that have really good feeding areas or sources of water. What I use to physically locate quails, I often use a quail call.
What is that?
And
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I lose you for a second?
no, sorry.
Oh, okay. So what does the quail call? Uh, do each of those species have the same call? Are they a little bit
I,
different? Do you
They
mix it?
are, yeah. I definitely mix it up in between both. One or the other seems to work on each species. To be honest, as far as the valley quail and gamma quail go,
Okay.
I've also heard there's been instances where mountain quail will be attracted to valley quail calls, and I think if they're in close proximity of each other, obviously that might make sense. But yeah, they're the valley quail and the Gambel's quail they sound pretty similar, and I kind of switch it up in between both, and I'm able to most cases to get a response from them. What we're mainly focusing on is the assembly call. Once you bust up a covey, they'll break up and they'll flush in different directions, and they have a very distinct call, and they'll call to each other so they could help each other regroup.
Even if the covey hasn't been busted up, they'll still respond to it.
There are cases when they do that. I think just I think naturally that happens in the wild. A quail will be in a particular area, and they're either wander off or become a little astray from the covey, or there are also other predators out there, both avian and you have bobcats and whatnot out here as well. So I'm sure that they that does happen from time to time, and I've located full coveys with the quail call.
So you call to them, you hear them, and at times I'm guessing they're probably several hundred yards away.
Not always the case. I think it could be dumb luck, or it's just maybe what I'm doing, maybe what I'm doing, actually works. But I tend to look for areas that are sandy, ravines out here, foothill areas that have shrub oaks or food that quail eat, and I kind of target those areas. And usually, most cases than not, I'm able to locate a covey, within a few, anywhere from a few feet to about 100 yards or so.
Nice. Then you just walk in stealthily, or how do you go about it?
Yeah, I try when I'm locating, when I'm out there hunting, obviously I'm not, I try not to walk in a straight line. I'm doing a lot of zigzagging, a lot of back and forth. Quail, especially valley quail, tend to hold pretty well in a lot of cases, and they'll hold, you can be a few feet away from them and are right at your feet in some cases. They'll they'll flush. So I tend to backtrack a lot. I tend to have to cover a lot more ground, I would say, than the average hunter that's out there hunting with a dog.
Well, I would imagine. Yeah. So you call, you know they're
Mhm.
there, and you walk up, and you're like, God dang it, they don't flush because some of those birds will hold so tight you
Oh,
almost have to
sure.
step on them, and that's where the dog would
Hmm.
just say they're right
Yeah. Hmm.
there, and then you walk in and you kick them up. But once you're close enough that they realize that there's
Hmm.
danger there, they will not respond to you again. So your calling now is done. So it's basically you just walk circles until they flush.
Yeah, I think you've hunted valley quail before.
Yeah.
I've seen on a couple of your shows. Uh, so they valley quail tend to be really vocal. I'm not sure if you've ever experienced that, especially obviously in the earlier seasons they're a lot more vocal. The smarter birds tend to reach the end of the season, and those tend to be not as vocal as the birds in the beginning of the season. But they do have a warning, like a warning call that they do to one each other if you're in close proximity, and again, I've kind of learned that, well, if they're doing that, they must be in really close vicinity here. So I tend to use all my senses aside from taste
Mhm.
to locate birds, and obviously with the alarm putt that they do sometimes, that you're probably up in a pretty close vicinity of them, and I know in that case to be ready to shoot at any time. And obviously if you could hear them, you could kind of triangulate, I guess, the area, and eventually pin them down. So it's I think it's a lot. Again, I'm using a lot of my senses. I'm watching, I'm looking. I'm looking for like escape routes to see if I see any runners or sentries out ahead of me, and it's just I think you have to utilize a lot more um, tracking skills in some sense as well to locate birds when you're hunting without a dog.
Have you ever used your skills on other bird species,
Um,
like a
as far
pheasant,
as
being able to spot pheasants with buckeye?
I haven't had the opportunity to. I think in a lot of cases, I'm very specialized out here in Southern California, with valley quail. But I have not had the opportunity to do it with like wild pheasant. I would love the opportunity, and I'm sure it's it has its challenges as well. And those guys are runners, from what I understand.
Mm.
Um, yeah,
Well, you've
not
got an
yet.
invitation with me. If you ever want to come to Minnesota, I'll take you out and we can
We'll
go
be
after some pheasants.
we'll do it. Yeah,
Uh,
we'll
what?
try it without a dog first and see if that works out. And if not,
Yeah, yeah. There you go. What's the hunting pressure like out there? Are you
you
because
know,
you're hunting
it,
public land, right?
yeah, well, 100%. I think in all cases when it comes to quail out here, I am hunting 100% public land out here. There's a few opportunities that I've had to hunt dove in some private area, but that's it's a totally different animal and method of hunting in most cases. But yeah, for the most part, we're hunting public land out here for quail. The pressure could be, obviously if you're in an area that's well known, that could always be a little bit more intense, especially in the opening of the season and the early days of the opener. And I tend to try to go to areas that aren't as well known. That doesn't always work. Someone sees you out there one time, the season prior. Obviously that area is probably going to be blown up the next season. So I try to switch it up a little bit, but for the most part, I would say the more effort you put in out here in Southern California, you tend to get into areas that aren't as touched as some of the fringes of the areas where maybe a little more well known.
So, are those properties? I mean, they're massive public land properties, right? In the mountains and in the
Sure.
valleys and stuff. I mean,
Mm.
just how large are they?
Oh, geez. I mean, Los Padres National Forest, I think, is maybe the second or third largest um, national forest out here in California. So, I mean, I'm not really sure on the acreage of that, but I mean, you're not going to have a problem in most cases, not being able to hunt a good sizable piece of public land out here.
Gotcha. What does a normal day look like for you as far as contacting coveys? How many birds do you think you see on an average day? And then what does a really good day look like?
Geez, so I think like a really good day, you're probably in the beginning stages of the season. You're more than likely to bump anywhere from really good size. And this also depends on just the overall health of the covey of year by year. The birds out here seem to really fluctuate with the rain and the precipitation that we get out here in Southern California. And unfortunately for Southern California, we're still experiencing a drought, I believe, and that's something that really affects the quail out here. But on a really good season, I would say like maybe this past season or the season prior, we were bumping probably about a good six to eight coveys. I would say, and these are pretty sizable coveys. Anywhere from 15 to 30 or 40 birds at a time, if not more.
Wow. Wow, that's fantastic hunting.
Hmm.
I mean, that's pretty good quail hunting anywhere in America, right? I mean,
Yeah, I would say.
there's a lot of different species, but if somebody sees 6 to 8 coveys, 15, 30, I mean, you're talking a couple hundred birds there by the time
Mhm.
it's all said and done, probably get off a few shots. I would imagine all of your shots are probably pretty close, right? Without having a dog, or there's nobody's bumping them ahead of you.
Yeah, I think most cases. Well, I don't know. I mean, it really depends. I would say in the early parts of the season, I'm making probably anywhere from 10 to about 20 yards for a shot. And obviously, as the season goes on, those shots tend to get a little further out. However, this past season, they were still fleshing pretty closely. So I would say within about 10 to 15 yards still.
Gotcha. What kind of shotgun do you use? Is it a 20 gauge?
I'm so for myself, I hunt with a 12 gauge, and there's a few reasons why, and a few theories that I have, and I just hunting without a dog, I just want to make sure that I'm getting every pellet, exactly where I need it, and hitting that bird as hard as I can, and ensuring that it doesn't get away from me or become crippled, and obviously hunting without a dog, that's something that as an ethical hunter, you want to really think about. So I hunt with a 12 gauge, and I typically hunt out there with about number six size shot.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Well, you're obviously very good at your craft. And speaking of craft, so the art side of it, because with Upland Jitsu, the art of upland hunting, describe the art side of the hunting to people that
Yeah,
are listening.
Yeah, so I think people, especially myself, for a very very long time, have struggled with a notion. Well, is upland hunting a sport and an art? And my conclusion is that I think it's more art. However, it's also a balance. There's a balance of both sport and art in this, and for myself, especially, it's just an art form in a lot of ways. And my art form may look a little differently than other people's art form, but I think everyone, to a degree, it is an art form. People hunting out there with a dog, with a dog. I mean, I consider that an art. It's something that at some point, I think. I'll delve into maybe not today or tomorrow, or I'm not really sure when, but eventually I think my art will evolve, and I'll end up getting into a dog and learning that, and all of its inherent challenges. I'm assuming that training a dog and going out there with a dog has, but yeah, again, this comes from my background in martial arts. The fighting arts were just that. They were designed initially for warfare and for defending oneself. But over time, those things have evolved and become an art form as well, functional art forms, and that's kind of what I consider upland hunting for myself. And yeah, and with that, it's just I also um, I'm an artist, as I guess you could say. I'm an artist in some ways, and I also enjoy drawing and doodling, and a lot of that happens to be geared towards the upland
Yeah.
hunting aspect of things. And yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
So what do your art drawings look like to somebody who hasn't seen them? How would you describe
It,
it?
I would so I think in a lot of ways when I want if I were to describe my own style of upland art would be kind of a mishmash of your early Americana punk rock upland art.
It's a pretty good description. I like your art. I think it's
Thank
fantastic.
you.
Is it all drawing or do you paint as well?
You know, the funny thing is, I'm going to delve into painting. I've not been the best painter around, but it's something that I kind of want to try again and just own my art to learn that. But yeah, the majority of it is ink and pencil currently.
Gotcha. I'm on your blog right now, and one of your latest articles is how to be a hip uplander, the
Yeah, I
ultimate guide
was.
to being a hipster in the uplands. What in the heck is that?
So, I myself, I think there's at least with my experience and what I've have yeah seen out there and just again just based on my own experiences, I think we just as a community and as an industry sometimes we take ourselves a little too seriously, and that's basically what that article was just kind of poking fun at our inner selves, and I myself as well, and just kind of having fun with it. And it was released on April 1st, so it was just a really big like kind of like haha April's Fools kind of deal, and some people actually took it seriously, which was kind of funny. So
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, you never know what you're going to get when you put yourself out there on the internet, right?
sure, yeah, absolutely, yeah. So it's just again just something to kind of not necessarily you know trying to just help out and just make light of things, and especially in these days of that we're experiencing today. And I think it's important not to always take not necessarily take yourself so seriously all the time.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. What is on the conservation side? What do you guys in California need out there more than anything on the land?
So conservation wise, I think for the most part we're doing a good job. I would like to see a lot more better management when it comes to the forest and a lot of this timber that's just dried out and rotted and becoming a fire hazard. I think a lot of our local chapters out here are doing a good quail forever chapters, that is, are doing a good job of maintaining a lot of these guzzlers and whatnot out here. I think the biggest threat currently is just access to a lot of these areas, and that maybe not necessarily be conservation, but I guess that will still be considered a conservation issue if we can't get into these areas and if I think, and yeah, that would be one of the bigger things. Um,
What
is
can
that
I
there's
ask?
a
Why
yeah,
why can't you get access to some of those places? What's
and
preventing?
it yeah. So the biggest threat would be the fracturing of the public lands areas, and that's being fractured by areas that are not allowing access, and a lot of that's just private property that's overlapping with a lot of these public areas where we could typically hunt. And I would say, if anything, that would be one of the bigger threats out here. And obviously, that could just snowball into bigger issues, and eventually will if we can't access these areas. These we're going to lose them altogether if we don't have an interest in these areas. If we can't hunt them, if we can't hunt them, we're not going to have an interest in them, and we're eventually going to lose them.
Do you keep up with numbers in California as far as, hunters participation and things like that? You look at some Midwest states and
Mm-hmm.
hunting is a big part of the culture in a lot of those areas.
Mm-hmm.
Like you look at South Dakota, I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
it's pheasant hunting, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you think of California and the reality in the hunting world, I think a lot of people think of California as an anti-hunting state. But aren't there like 400,000 upland bird hunting license or small game licenses sold in California every year?
Yeah, I don't know the concrete numbers on that, but I know it's pretty significant. But when you look at the size of what California is, and the amount of people that live here, it's kind of a a, a drop in the bucket, so to speak. Pardon me. Um, yeah, it's I think it's important not to minimize, however, that number. It's still a pretty good amount of people that are interested in hunting and participating in hunting. um I think it's very important that people understand that California is, although it does have its challenges, and I think in some cases it's not necessarily anti-hunting to degree. I think there's a sentiment that people don't have this misunderstanding of what hunting is, and I think if we deliver that message, or modify how we uh, express that message, that people will maybe be a little bit more understanding. But I think there is this perceived stereotype that the overall state is not open to hunters or hunting, and in some cases that might be fair. And again, I think there are some barriers where that might seem to be the case, but I think we're doing a good job of maintaining that heritage to some degree. I just think we need to do a better job for sure, and also just let the rest of the country know that there are great hunting opportunities out here in California.
If you were an outstate hunter, you're saying, let's just say for me, hey,
Mhm.
George, I want to go hunting in California. What would you recommend to me? Where should I go? When?
Yeah, I hate to be biased, but Southern California. I mean, it's just there's. I mean, for myself, I mean, I'm about 15 minutes away from the beach, and as an overall sportsman, the opportunities out here are just great. I don't consider myself like a big angler or fisherman, but there's so many fishing opportunities out here. I recently took up fly fishing in the surf, these past few weeks, and I've been, the opportunity is just, it's 15 minutes away. Why not? It wouldn't make
Right?
sense for me not to do that. And I could be 15 minutes from the beach, and from there, I'm probably about a good, anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour plus into some good hunting area. Why not? Southern California offers some great opportunities, and we're surrounded by these magnificent national forests, and great fishing, as far as lakes go, and rivers. You have the Current River area, and you have one of the biggest fisheries in the world, the Pacific Ocean, right on us. So it's just yeah, don't I, the, pers- the perception that I think a lot of people have is that it's not friendly, and it's not, there's no way that you can do that kind of stuff out here, and that's just not true.
Right. And then that there aren't any wild birds to hunt either. And
Oh yeah, I
that's
mean, I could walk outside my door, 20 minutes, and probably not even 20 minutes. If I just drove, a block away, and just jumped in the hills, I'm bumping into birds.
do you get
I
a lot
can't
of
I can't hunt
speaking
them there, but they're there.
oh, and why can't you hunt them there?
So that the particular area that I live in, I mean, I would be within city limits, but they're
Oh,
basically out. Yeah, they're like right on the fringe of like city limits.
gotcha. Well, I've talked to some other hunters in California
Hmm.
that have since moved out of the state because they had bird dogs and they
Hmm.
had people that literally um, harassed them because of it. They were anti-hunting and thought he was
Hmm.
being cruel. This one particular person thought that he was being cruel to the dogs and the animals, and they posted signs on his property. And so, I mean, that's his story. I don't think that's how everyone out there feels. But do you see that quite often?
I wouldn't say that it's unheard of. I have definitely heard of that type of behavior towards some hunters. I can't say that it necessarily has ever happened to me. I have had conversations where it has come up, and people, I think in most cases, are just more curious why I do what I do, and I tend to, to explain it, I think, in a way that maybe has not been explained to them before, and just offer the I guess I offer up the platter of like, well, this is a type of also a type of conservation that oftentimes gets a little overlooked, and I think a lot of people don't ever see it in that particular light. That what we're doing is we're not just going out there to murder Bambi and a few quail. It's there's so much more that goes into it, and and financially, with the taxation and with the tags and stamps that we buy, that benefits conservation and keeps these places, these public places open and free, and for anyone to walk into. But
Right.
yeah, it's not. I think again, it comes down to conversation, and just having conversations with people, and just I think most people in most cases are going to be somewhat open minded to it. I talked to a person that is a complete vegan, does not believe in hunting, but she understands that what I'm doing is to some degree, well, I wouldn't even say to a degree, it is good for conservation, and she respects that, and understands that. Will never participate in hunting, or ever eat wild game, but she understands it because of the
You take a
conversations we had.
Yeah, you take a really good approach to it. I mean, and that's a good reminder for all of us. Every time we put on a blaze orange hat and we walk into a convenience store or a restaurant, and that opportunity might come available, sometimes it can be attacking from both sides.
Mhm.
Um, but I think what we're learning here, and I'll just speak for myself, the opportunities that we have to have conversations, like I get to have with you right now, or with
Mhm.
Jarrell, or other hunters across America about their own circumstances. And then when we get the chance to talk about hunting, why we do it,
Mhm.
why, why it matters in this world, and our impact on wildlife and conservation in the uplands, but in reality, the big picture, just
Mhm.
across America. It's so important to
Absolutely.
be ready to have that conversation with somebody, and just politely, and not attack back. And, if they say I'm an anti hunter, say, I understand that. And here's why I am. And then when you have that one on one conversation, like you had with that lady, she probably respected you for you sharing your knowledge with her, and it made her potentially think about it.
Yeah, I think again the approach. Then you've touched on this. It's just the approach of how we start these conversations, and I think we haven't always done a great job of doing that as an industry. I think in the past we've been guilty of just taking this stance of like, well, this is what I do. I'm going to do it, and you have to accept it, and without really explaining ourselves, or being sensitive to other people's perception of what we do. And I think and especially in this case of this person that I spoke to that's a vegan. I'm trying to meet her in the middle ground. I'm not trying to necessarily convert her, but it's just trying to allow people to understand. And I, even though I'm not a vegan myself, I understand her point of view, and I understand why she would feel that way. I may not necessarily agree with it, but it's just finding that common ground, and just deliver the way that we deliver our message. I think that's very, very important, and especially in this you know these times of where we tend to be losing a lot of hunters. And I think our goal is to preserve conservation, to preserve hunting, and that requires a different approach to our messaging, I think.
Absolutely. I respect your work a lot. I appreciate you,
I
uh,
appreciate that.
keeping the uplands such a priority, and being an advocate for it in conservation. Last question.
Mhm.
What are you most looking forward to this hunting season? And is there anybody that you're looking forward to? So that's actually two questions. Is there
Okay.
anybody that you're really looking forward to introducing to the hunt this year?
Yeah, so for this season, I'm really looking forward to getting back out there. It's been a rough 2020, and I'm not sure if it's going to get any easier. And the uplands is a good way to kind of leave that stuff behind. It's important to understand that this world is still hurting, and it's still undergoing a lot of change, and we need to be the advocates for positive change in a lot of ways. So the uplands, even though it could be an escape, I think it's important to have great conversations and continue those conversations, around the campfire. And that's one thing that I'm really looking forward to doing, with my crew of people that I hunt with, and the new people that I hope to come in contact with as well. And what was the last question?
Is there anybody in particular you're excited to introduce to hunting this fall?
Yeah, with the type of work that I do, and with my writing, I hope to, my hopes is always to, try to get new hunters out there. I get messages almost on a daily basis where, people are saying, well, I appreciate your work, and I appreciate what you wrote, and that's really helped me kind of like come along. And, I try to help those people out as much as I can. I can't help everyone, and I can't hunt with everyone. So, this is my best contribution to hunting. So I think that, to answer your question, I want to see more people out there, and I hope that my work helps get people out there. And eventually, I would like to see my daughter get out there. So she's still pretty young, and I think we still have a few years in front of us before we get out there. But I want to get her out there one of these days, even if it's just
How
one time.
how old is she?
She will be 5 in November.
Oh, that's a great age. Is
Yeah.
the terrain a little rough for her to try to follow you?
In some cases, I think it would. I think in our first few times out, I would try to find like a little, flatter area where it's, a little bit more open, and I'm not really sure how um, that would work out. But she's also going through this phase where she's you know kind of going through that icky girl phase where she doesn't like snakes, and she thinks there's snakes out there. So it's a lot of conversation and a lot of reassurance, and I think it will get there eventually.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I remember, so my boys are 6 and 4 now, and I remember when
uh
my oldest turned 3, I brought him out turkey hunting for the first
Okay.
time. And so there we were able to, I could carry him out there in the dark on my shoulders. And then we're sitting in a place, and he didn't last more than 20 minutes, but he remembers those turkeys gobbling in the
Oh, that's
trees,
awesome.
in the dark. And then we went goose hunting, where again we're not walking, goose and
Mhm.
duck hunting. And so then they're in a place where they can talk, and we brought snacks and all that. So it's just these little experiences slowly.
Yeah.
But here where we upland hunt, for the most part, the grass is pretty tall and their legs are really short. So
Yeah,
they're,
yeah,
like, is this the year that they go hunting? We watch all the videos,
yeah.
and they watch our shows, and they're like, "Oh, Daddy, I can't wait to go pheasant hunting with you." I'm like, "Oh, you have no idea how much I can't wait to take you with." But so
Yeah.
I can absolutely relate. Where can people, if they want to learn more about some of your articles or read them, are they all on uplandjitsu.com, or is there another location for them?
So yeah, the majority of my writing would be on my website, uplandjitsu.com. I've also been writing for some other publications, mainly Project Upland, and you could find some of my latest works there. And obviously, you can find me on social media as well. Instagram seems to be one of the easier ways to find me, and that's at upland_jitsu. And I tend to, at least announce when a new article is coming out that way. So it's happens to be a good way to reach me, or find my work as well.
Excellent. George, appreciate you taking the time today to join us.
Thank you.
Again, that's
It was a
George
pleasure.
Ramirez, Upland Jitsu, the art of upland hunting. I wish you a very successful hunting season this year. And my goodness, it would be fun to join you on a
Let's do
hunt.
it.
Yeah, yeah, just to show people that it
Oh,
can be done.
leave the
And
dogs at home and let's come on out.
yeah, I want to see what that looks like firsthand. When is the best time of the year to hunt in California?
I would say, if the heat, if you're into that whole, hunting out in October, and it being cold, and breezy, and the leaves falling down, then I would say that's probably not going to be ideally when you want to hunt out here, because it doesn't get cold out here till after probably November. But I would say the best hunting occurs in the early part of the season, in October and November.
Gotcha. All right, I'll be there.
Let's do it.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, George.
Thank you.
We are out of time today. I am not entirely sure where we're going to be next year, who we're going to be, or next week, who we're going to be visiting with, but we appreciate you taking the time. Again, this episode has been brought to you by North Dakota Tourism. Plan a hunt in North Dakota this fall, and you will find out why their bird hunting opportunities are legendary. We'll catch you next week on another episode of the Flush Podcast.